terrorism, state sponsorship of it, and who gets to designate who as a terrorist organization. It's a lot of big things. It's a lot of complicated math, but let's stick around and let's talk about it. Hello there, everybody, and welcome back to this week's episode of The End of the Week. The End of the Week is a national defense and security podcast and news review show. It is I, your good friend, Morgan Houston, a.k.a. Whiskey Mo, the internet's least famous academic. I hope you're seeing some microphone lists. I hope this sounds good. We're going to work on it. I'm trying new things, always trying to be better at this. But as always, I just want to say thank you for those of you who watch. I know my last episode wasn't very popular, but I actually was expecting that, as defense policy for budgets is not something that's very popular. But hey, you ask, I will deliver. So why don't you go ahead and get in the comments. Tell me what you want to hear me talk about, and we'll talk about it. But before we dive into this week's episode, which, let me tell you what, is a doozy, I do want to give you a shout out to my Patreon. If you want to get these one day early, I'm thinking about some other gifts that we may be able to do. Maybe something like a Discord server where we can have discussions and chat. I don't know, maybe get some stickers, and if you join, I'll mail you out a sticker or something. I'm working on it. I'm still kind of new to this whole thing, but I hope that you're enjoying and that you get some value out of this. And as always, I just want to say thank you to everyone who watches, especially those of you who are regular. There's a few of you that I know that are very regular watchers and listeners to the podcast. And it means the world to me. It means that what I'm doing even has some value to at least one person. It's worth it. And I will continue to do that as long as there's at least one person watching, and maybe even if there isn't, because I get some value out of this. So what are we talking about today? We are talking about designating foreign terrorist organizations and what is starting to happen in a few GOP-controlled states. So let me give you a little bit of a roadmap of what we're going to talk about today. We are going to talk about the designation of a foreign terrorist organization and what that means according to federal law. What is happening within a few states in the southern part of the United States, the organization that they are targeting. What this means for resources, the conversation versus state versus national, and of course, overall, why this matters. So what is happening here? This week, as always, this is always a weekly show. So this week, I read a fantastic article from the New York Times about Texas and Florida having their own designations for foreign terrorist organizations. Now, this is something that has been around for quite some time. This is tied in with Title 8 of the U.S. Code, which is the Alien and Nationalization law, and it has to do with who has the authority to designate something as terrorism. And in this particular case, there's a certain way to go about it, but we're going to get that into a minute. The organization that Florida and Texas are talking about is the Council on American and Islamic Relations. They've been around since 1995. They were formed in Washington, D.C., mostly in response to the movie True Lies, which is, if you haven't seen, it's a wonderfully horrible movie. It's a Schwarzenegger movie. I'm a Schwarzenegger nut, love Schwarzenegger movies. The premise of the movie is that Arnold Schwarzenegger is married to Jamie Lee Curtis, and Jamie Lee Curtis has no idea what he does, and he is actually a super spy that works for the U.S. government. And in this case, the bad guys are Arabic and Islamic terrorists, and there was some concern about the portrayal of Arabs in the movie, and this is where this came about. And for a significant chunk of time, the CAIR, the CAIR, the Council on American and National or Islamic Relations. I'll figure out how to say that as we were working on this. But they worked in tandem with many organizations, including the FBI, to try and tamp down on anti-Islamic and Islamophobic activities, on anti-Arab activities, on biases and straight up prejudice and hate crimes. So what has happened after September 11th, 2001, there was an increasing amount of Islamophobia in the United States. And there was a lot of concern. And in 2005, the Council on American and Islamic Relations coordinated a joint release of a fatwa. A fatwa generally has some negative connotations, but all it is a declaration, and usually a religious declaration. But they coordinated it with 344 American Muslim organizations, mosques, and imams nationwide, and it stated, quote, Islam strictly condemns religious extremism and the use of violence against innocent lives. There is no justification in Islam for extremism or terrorism. Targeting civilians' lives and property through suicide bombings or any other method is haram or forbidden. And those who commit these barbaric acts are criminals, not martyrs. And I think this is really important. It was one of those things. I know I struggled when I was a young man, especially as a young airman, when I was in the Air Force, to separate Islam and people like Al-Qaeda, the Taliban. And it was real easy to fall into this trap. And it was why in an organization like the Council on American and Islamic Relations was really important, because it allowed that discussion, that interaction, because this is why we talk about why representation is mattered in media, because when you see someone and see them that they're not really a threat or a risk, what you're seeing is the actuality of the people, and that these extreme violent acts are the acts of a small portion of this group. It's very much the same as if we were to judge all Christians by Tim McVeigh and the actions that happened on the Oklahoma City bombing in the 90s. But one of the things that has brought this about and continued is in 2007, CAIR was named, along with 245 other organizations, by federal prosecutors as an unindicted co-conspirator or joint venture in Hamas funding. And this was tied around a charity organization called the Holy Land Foundation. And this was a case where members of this group was found guilty of material support of terrorism. And then these 245 organizations were unindicted co-conspirators. And this was really problematic because CAIR was very concerned about how this would taint their relationship. And one of the things that happened is that the U.S. filed actions against the Holy Land Foundation. It was the largest Muslim charity in the United States, and it was for providing funds for Hamas. And federal prosecutors filed pleadings, and along with the 245 other organizations, they publicly listed CAIR and its chairman as the co-conspirators. And this doesn't mean that there was any kind of conviction or evidence against them, but it was something that was really difficult for the organization to deal with, because they were tied in with a case for funding a terrorist organization. And what makes this even more problematic and more difficult is that through various democratic processes in the West Bank and Gaza, there are very different organizations that have been elected to run these areas. And Hamas at times has been elected to run parts of the Palestinian areas that in conjunction with the PLO. And so it's really hard for this to separate. I think the closest comparison for a lot of people to understand is the connection between Sinn Féin and the IRA in Ireland during the Troubles. And still today, when we talk about the PIRA, the real IRA, they're still continuing the struggle against unionist forces in Northern Ireland. And this is, they've been fighting against this for a while. And now I will say this, and this is one of the things that I have problems with many organizations, right, left, center, is that at times these organizations are not very good at their own PR. And some of the spokespeople and some of the members of this organization have said some things that have been very controversial. And while they may not have been necessarily wrong, or they have been not ethically or morally incorrect, they kind of rubbed some people the wrong way. And so they've continued to be kind of a thorn in the side, especially of conservative members of the American political system. With that being said, in 2025, 4 members of the House, Republican members of the House, sought to designate CAIR as a foreign terrorist organization, an FTO, and they were calling on the United States Secretary of State to do so. However, no progress has been made after this bill has been introduced, and it's been sitting in the House since 2025, and nothing has come of it since. But what is a foreign terrorist organization? According to Title 8 of the U.S. Code, A foreign terrorist organization is designated by the Secretary of Defense, and they are authorized to designate an organization as an FTO in accordance with this subsection if the Secretary finds that the organization is a foreign organization, the organization engages in terrorist activity, and they give a list to a definition, or retains the capability and intent to engage in terrorist activity or terrorism, and the terrorist activity or terrorism of the organization threatens the security of the United States nationals or the national security of the United States. So that means that the only person who can designate an organization as a foreign terrorist organization is the Secretary of Defense. Or sorry, not the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State. And then there's a whole process that goes into this. The Bureau of Counterterrorism and Countering Violent Extremism of the State Department, they are monitoring activities of organizations across the globe. They review potential targets, and they look at actual attacks or threats or online activity. And they are deciding if these groups are actually engaged in planning and preparations to have future attacks on either the U.S. proper or U.S. capabilities or targets throughout the globe. One of the things that is really important about this is that it must be a foreign organization, right? So if it is like the KKK cannot be described or designated as a foreign terrorist organization, even though it is clearly a terrorist organization, it cannot be designated as a foreign terrorist organization. So remember that as we continue to talk about this. So after the Bureau of Counterterrorism and Countering Violent Extremism recommends an organization to the Secretary will coordinate within the interagency, talking to the Secretary of Treasury because they have some authorities as well, the FBI, CIA, NSA, et cetera, and then after enough deliberation, they can designate an organization as a foreign terrorist organization. Now, once an organization is declared an FTO, that is indefinite until removed. And there is a significant number of organizations that have been removed. I will post a link in the show description to all of the current listed FTOs as well as the delisted organizations as well. So this is what does this do? This ties in with an executive order from the early 2000s from President George W. Bush that affects the finances of these organizations, property seizures, bank seizures, anything that's in the U.S. that is tied to these organizations can be seized, and a lot of pressure can be put on it. Think about economic sanctions, military pressure, all of these things can be done, and a lot of coordination with local law enforcement also can be engaged. But what happens here afterwards when we start to turn that internal? One of the things that I find the most interesting about this whole situation is the distribution of capabilities between a state government and a national government. And in this case, I don't mean state as in the nation state. I mean the state is in the federal representation of the United States. The United States, for if you happen to be outside and are not entirely sure about how the definition works, it is a federal system, so it's a federally run system, very similar to what a lot of members of the EU are trying to active for their countries. But the federal government has certain powers that are allocated to them in the Constitution, and one of those includes national defense. And then everything that is not enumerated in the Constitution is then delegated to the states. The thing is that state governments, no matter how rich and powerful they are, because we do have some fairly economically powerful states. California on its own would be like one of the third or fourth highest GDP in the country, in the world. Texas, I believe, is right up there around 8 or 9. However, they also do not have some of the resources available to the national government. I think mostly of like intelligence gathering, intelligence analysis. Yes, like something like the Texas Department of Safety has a very strong law enforcement presence with some reconnaissance and intelligence agencies in the guise of the Texas Rangers and some of their specialized units, but they don't have the power or the capability of something like CIA, NSA, DIA, all of these three-letter acronyms that are intelligence agencies dedicated to a certain aspects like satellites or human intelligence or communications intelligence, all of these things. So because of that, it's very interesting that Texas and Florida have decided that they are going to try and designate organizations as foreign terrorist organizations. Now, this is not the first time that Texas has done this. It has happened frequently enough that one of the articles that were cited in the New York Times, which is an article from a legal scholar, they actually would separate it out as a TXFTO, specifically a Texas Designated Foreign Terrorist Organization. And what this does, it is, at least according to their law, which this is now being challenged in court, it allows the state of Texas to seize property, to seize money, and to prosecute anyone who could be seen as providing material support to a Texas Designated Foreign Terrorist Organization. And the same thing with Florida. It's very similar in that, but it's mostly monetary. It does not give, the laws that they are using to do this does not give the state the power to seize land and property. But this is, you can see that this is very interesting, especially in the nomenclature here. We are designating the Council on American and Islamic Relations, which was founded here in the U.S., operating in the U.S., as a foreign terrorist organization. I want that to sit with you for a minute. Legally, this organization cannot be designated an FTO by federal law, yet these two state laws have now designated this organization as a foreign terrorist organization. Now, why does all this matter? I think it's really important for us to understand why the impacts that something like this will have on our society. I think one of the biggest things that we need to understand is how this is really politically motivated, right? There is very much a movement within certain subsectors of the American conservative movement that is harshly Islamophobic. And all this does is it stymies free speech, it stymies the right of free association, and it makes it really difficult for us to cohere and coalesce as a nation. One of the things that makes the United States such a unique place, despite what the Secretary of Defense thinks, is its diversity. The diversity of its people make it very unique and strong, because what that means is that we must come together despite our differences to the betterment of the nation. And what happens, and I think what people in these positions are forgetting, is the idea of reciprocity. Anything that you do to somebody, and once it becomes legal, can now be done to you. And I don't want to live in a world where just because someone has a different political opinion than me, we can designate them as a terrorist organization. We're already seeing it now with Flock. The CEO of Flock is saying that anyone who is against Flock is a terrorist organization that wants to thrive in chaos, right? And I think this idea of extremism when it comes to the way that we talk about people of different political or religious ideologies is problematic, because it just makes it too easy to have an idea of reciprocity against each other. There is just some general civil rights, problems. There's a great quote from the piece that I will link from Knight Columbia that states that are now declaring civil rights groups to be terrorists cannot claim even the traditional reasons invoked for federal expertise, such as the staffing and process for making such determinations or equivalent access to classified intelligence. It's unvarnished politics all the way through. And I think now there's just also the risk of taking away resources from actual terrorist threats. If we are going to be using, say, something like the Texas Rangers, which is a statewide investigative body and law enforcement agency in Texas that does a lot of things, including border security, border intelligence. And despite what, I don't think that border security is necessarily something that needs to go away. I do think that it needs to be refurbished. But if we take some of the assets that are necessary for these things, and now we're focusing them on an American think tank and advocacy and lobbying group, now we're taking those resources away from investigations that could really be harmful and damaging to the state of Texas, to a city within there, or the nation as a whole. And I think this is the problem that we're facing. And we need to get away from this political driven idea of us versus them. And you see it being targeted in things like this National Security Presidential Memorandum 7 that was issued after the Charlie Kirk assassination, where they are trying to make these tenuous links between this global leftist and Islamic and communist cabal that is acting in cohorts to assassinate and violently riot in America. And it's a playbook that has been used in very other right-wing authoritarian regimes that is very dangerous. We're seeing it now with the Prairie Land protesters. Yes, one of those protesters shot an agent or a law enforcement officer. That person needs to suffer the consequences. But a protest, even if it's uncomfortable, they don't deserve 70 years in prison, right? So we're using these things to create fear, and so we can destroy the rights of people, because the political environment right now is creating a space where anyone who is opposed to me politically is now a danger to the state. And if that sounds familiar to you, you know ball. So thank you as always for joining. This one was a bit different. This one bothered me as soon as I read this article from the New York Times. I'm not always a fan of the New York Times. Sometimes even I feel that they are just not always a great representation, especially in their opinion piece, but they are still one of the better investigative journalist outlets in America right now. And so when I read this, it was just so disturbing to me that I had to opine about it. And there's been so much going on for me personally. Like, I haven't really had an opportunity to really dive into a lot of national security stories the last couple of weeks. I know for me, my students are coming back here in a couple of weeks. I'm getting ready to do my last semester of classes for this second master's of mine. But as always, I really hope that you found some value in this. This one may come across as a little bit of a controversial topic. And if you have thoughts, please get down below. Get into those comments. Tell me what you think. Also, if you have come across a story that has international relations or national security implications, please share it with me. Ask me questions. As we saw last week, if you ask a question, I will get at you, and I will give you my opinion, and I will break it down and try and fundamentally get everything. The stories that I talked about today will be linked in the show notes, as well as a couple of other informations. I'm gonna post a link to this national security presidential memorandum, to the FTOs, all of those kinds of things. But if you did enjoy this episode, please gently caress that like button. Last week, I don't know if I got any. So please give me one. Give me one. Let's make up for it. If you want to see some of these things, please go ahead and subscribe. Subscribing is free. It doesn't hurt nobody. It doesn't cost you anything. And it really does boost some visibility for me. If you want to know when these videos come out, please go ahead and hit the notification bell. That will let you know when I have dropped a new video. I'm getting ready to hopefully purchase some new equipment. So I've got a long form video that I'm working on right now that I'm writing the script to. So this has actually got some writing done. So this is something, I'm not going to tell you what it is. I think it's going to be really cool. It's also possibly very controversial, but I'm very excited about it. It's something I've been working on for about a decade or so. So it's something that I'm very excited about. Also, if you want to get these episodes a week early, please go ahead, subscribe to my Patreon right here. That is patreon.com/whiskeymo for $5 a month. That's it right now, but I'm working on some other benefits that will go. So if you do that, thank you. But as always, if you just want to watch this for free, it will always be for free on YouTube and Spotify. And I thank you again for taking the time to watch and listen to this episode, and I will see you again at the end of the week.